Yeah, that should be working. The red light is on, indicating that record's happening. But I'm basically here to satisfy my mother, because she's been putting on some pressure onto me, saying I should talk to somebody. She's quite worried about me.
Can you tell me what it is your mother's worried about?
Well, September last year, I took a group of youngsters out on a hiking expedition, and one of them fell over a waterfall and fractured his skull, and he's all rightish now. He's not fully, well, he's pretty much back to normal now, and I was a bit shaken up about that at first, but you know, quite a lot of time has passed between there. I think most of the when this happened I was 21. I've had another birthday since then, and I used to be quite involved in taking youngsters out and that sort of thing, and I'm just not interested in that anymore, and my mom, I think, doesn't understand that I've done that for a while. I've had enough for a while, and I now want to just spend my weekends and evenings and things. Well, I'm still a student. I'm in my third year now, and I'm happy when I've got leisure time that I can just sit and listen to music. And she thinks I drink too much. That's because I drink more than my mother and father. They're pretty much teetotal, and I maybe go through through half a bottle at least of vodka as a Saturday evening or that sort of thing. But I think they're overreacting a little bit about that. It's happened about 8 months ago. It was September last year, and I don't really know what good it's going to help to talk about it, because I've talked about it to a lot of people at the time, and I feel, well, he's getting better, if not completely better now, and but I'll talk to you.
How's your relationship with the boy now?
I pretty much drifted out of contact with him and most of the other people that were involved there.
How was it before the accident?
We got on well. Quite well. He wasn't my sort of favourite in the group, but he was good company. And I think I'd better give you the actual story. There's a group of myself plus 5 youngsters. We'd been on outings like this before a couple of times. I didn't organise them. The main youngster in the group was a lad called Robin, who's aged 13. He's my girlfriend's ex-girlfriend's younger brother, and we used to go on some outings together, and he quite fancy. His father isn't around, and he's got a couple of older sisters, so there was quite a lot of encouragement really for if I was interested in spending time with him, if I could maybe organise adventures or something like that, supposedly to give him more of a masculine input. Supposedly these things are important, and so we got together. I've met a couple of his friends, and we would organise outings where we would go out and hike during the day, and then come back in the evening, and at that stage my girlfriend would have made us some cakes or something like that. So we'd come back all big macho types, and have coffee, and I'd have dinner at the girlfriend is Philippa, at her house, and it'd be a nice social occasion. So on this particular outing, there were 5 youngsters with me. I suppose you could say the star of the show is a chap called Fossi. His name was Andre Forster. He's a South African lad, and he was known as Fossi. He was 14, and had a good sense of humour in a rather abstract sort of way. One of Robin's friends. Then another one was a chap called Brian Brown, same name as that Australian film actor, and who, again, a very good sense of humour, good company. Then there was he was also 14, and he'd been in a lot of outdoor sorts of activities. He was a scout, and he was very competent. Then there was Robin, who I get on very well with. He's like a little brother to me, I suppose, and I enjoy spending time with him as well. Then there was a youngster called Bradley, who was younger still. He was about 12 or so, who I feel quite sorry for. I think I'd actually pushed for Bradley to come along on this outing, because supposedly Robin has to organise these in the sense that he has to decide where these outings are going to take place and who's going to come along, but sometimes he needs some gentle encouragement, and it doesn't seem to me to be any point in taking a group of these kids on an outing unless we have a full carload. So it's me plus 5 passengers. Bradley is a youngster I feel a little bit sorry for. He doesn't mix very well with the group, and he tends to irritate some of the other boys, but I advocated that he come along on this. And lastly was a youngster, Ian, who is my younger sister's boyfriend's little brother. So that's my concession to family, in-laws and things like that. And Ian's a great little guy. He's much more childish than Robbie, but I've got a lot of time for him. I'm starting to get on better with my sister's boyfriend, but I quite like him, and I was quite pleased to invite him along. So we went on this outing to a place that we've been before, and we parked the car at the farmhouse where we know I know the farmer, and hiked up into some hills, explored the area a little bit, and then we followed a riverbed down through. It was quite savannah-ish type countryside, except along this river valley river, I don't know what you would call it, not very hot on this sort of terminology, where this river cut its way down through the hills, and there were bushes and trees and things like that growing along. It was growing along us. It was quite jungly in some places as well, which was the ideal, exciting adventure type environment for these youngsters. And we were heading down, following the river downwards, and I was towards the back with Bradley, who tends to be fairly clumsy, and I was with him just in case he slipped or anything like that, so I could help him over the difficult bits, and I suppose to cut down on his irritability value to the rest of the youngsters. And while I was there, I heard that Fossey had actually fallen over a waterfall, and I don't actually remember hearing it. I sort of suddenly knew that he'd fallen over the waterfall. They must have told me, but I don't remember that very well. So I told Bradley to stay put, and I grabbed I had the first aid kit with me always, and I dashed to the top of the waterfall that he'd fallen over, and I couldn't see him, and I then moved to the side of the waterfall and got down as fast as possible. I don't remember getting down there. And then when I was actually at the bottom, I could see him lying. He was on a rock, half in a rock, half in the water. It was quite shallow there. If it had been deeper, he would have just floated okay. And he was covered in blood. He was unconscious at the time. And I was with him immediately, and he was a mess. He had a massive big cut down the centre of his head, and it was bleeding profusely. And Brian was there with me, and I was concerned that he wasn't. When we got to him, his head was on the rock, but the water was sort of lapping to round about this level on his chest, and I was concerned about if he'd broken his back or something, if we moved him, that we might, through our negligence, actually cripple him worse than he was already damaged. So I was staying with him. At that time, he started to become conscious and he started thrashing around a bit and screaming. And I stayed with his head, if you could say that. And Brian checked out and reported to me that his leg was broken and his collarbone was broken and that sort of thing. Then I sent Robbie and Brian to go and get help because we needed. Fossey was bigger than me, thinner than me, but taller than me. He was no lightweight that you could just sort of carry him for any length of time. We must have been about 4 miles away from the farmhouse at this stage, and there wasn't any tracks or anything like that. We'd been walking up paths to get there. So I sent Robbie off to go and get help, and I stayed with Fossey, and eventually help arrived, and we got him onto a bit of a stretcher, and we carried him out. Robbie went and fetched the ambulance. I taught him how to drive my car, and when they got back to the farmhouse, there was nobody there, so he'd driven my car and gone and fetched the ambulance. So they'd had a big adventure there, and I was chuffed that it had been worthwhile teaching him to drive. And the ambulance arrived, and we got into hospital, and that's basically the story.
Could we go back to the day before the actual treatment? Could you tell me something about your expectations of that?
Right, well, this was on Saturday, so on the Friday night, it was pretty much the same group. We all went to the drive-in, which I presume you know what those are. You don't have them in Britain, but it's, yeah. And that was again a sort of Barry plus family event, really. My girlfriend and I would take pretty much the same gang along, and we'd go to the drive-in. If the weather was fair, then we'd take out a ground sheet or a carpet or something like that, put it out in front of the car, and have sleeping bags and things like that, and we'd all sit out on front of the car and watch the film from there, which just meant that we got a better view of what was happening, and it was much nicer to be able to cuddle up to Philip like that. So there's a nice sort of atmosphere. There were a couple of very good movies, or very amusing movies, sort of all-round family entertainment movies, which one was called The Gods Must Be Crazy, which was a big hit amongst the kids, and I think Phil and I enjoyed how much the kids were enjoying it. And I just remember Fossey was being, I can't remember him actually saying or doing anything, but he was really enjoying this movie, and he really seemed to be very, it's wrong to say he seemed to be very much alive, because he didn't die, but he was full of the joys of life at that stage. And 24 hours later he was unconscious and in hospital in intensive care. So we had, yeah, it ranged from the previous evening. It was a very good evening, and I think we were looking forward to it the next day, and it was a fun weekend. We were going to really enjoy ourselves. Then I had a fair amount of work to do on Sunday, and I think I was going to enjoy the Friday night, and I was going to enjoy the Saturday outing with the kids during the day, and then coming back all sweaty and dusty and in the evening.
Right. Can you tell me about the events before you were following the river? Before following the river, what happened then?
Nothing really happened. We parked the car, had a bit of a chat with the farmer, told him where we were going, which part of the farm we were going, and then we just hiked around. We went up to the origins of the river where it came out of the ground, and there were some sort of large potholes, and I had my camera with me, and the lads all climbed down into a pothole, and I took a photo of them there. And then we were just following. We'd had lunch, so our packs were lighter after that. And I think Ian. I was particularly pleased at how little Ian was fitting into the group, because he was only 10 or 11 at that time, and he didn't know any of the others. But I think I'd let the kids know, the other youngsters know, that I wanted Ian to enjoy himself along there. And I was quite chuffed with the way that he was fitting in, and he was. I remember being very pleased that Ian was enjoying this, so it had helped with me fitting in well. Yeah, I just liked that. I was pleased that he had fitted in.
So, before you heard Vossi, is it? Vossi?
It would be to you. It's
Yeah.
pronounced Fossi in the original.
Before hearing of him falling down the waterfall, what were you thinking then?
I was back with Bradley, who was he's a clumsy lad, and I was worried that he might fall, which is pretty ironic, and hurt himself. So there was a part of the area was a bit slippery, and I was there helping him, and I think I was actually quite irritated that I brought him along, because he, just as I'd enjoyed having Ian along, Bradley was annoying the other youngsters, and I think also Ian was teaming, little Ian, who I felt I'd better keep an eye on to make sure he was enjoying himself socially. He was out fairly near the front with the humorous lads. Fossi and Brian were the ones who were cracking jokes all the time, and I suppose I felt a little irritated that I was sort of having to traipse at the back looking after this youngster, instead of being in the forefront of things where the sort of humour was taking place. Though Brian and Robbie as well. Robbie's not terribly Robin is not terribly humorous, but he's good company as well. But I think the place to be to get the most enjoyment out of that would have been right up at the front. So I find it ironic that I was at the back looking after the one that I thought was at risk of hurting himself, and then the person who did hurt himself was the biggest one.
So how did you feel when you heard that Vossi had hurt himself?
I almost felt that I'd went into an automatic mode. I think something that I might have thought afterwards, I don't remember it, was that it might have been a joke, ha ha ha, somebody's fallen over a waterfall, ha ha. So, I don't remember thinking that at all. I told Bradley to stay put, and I moved very fast down to the past the others, and I was telling them, they were of course all huddled around. I think I could tell by the expressions that there was something wrong, that it wasn't a joke. You know, little kids don't sit there with eyes this big if they're having a joke. It's sort of and so I went to the edge of the waterfall. It was just a shallow trickle of a waterfall, but it then fell quite a long way, so you could stand at the top of the waterfall without any danger of going over, with just the water flowing around the side of your boots. And I looked down, I couldn't see him anywhere there, but there was sort of canopy of trees. It was about 20 metres, that would be what, 35 foot or something like that. It was quite a long distance. We could see bits of the pool, but we couldn't see it all. Couldn't see the entire area, and I didn't doubt at all that he'd gone over there. So I then was faced with, how do I get down? Because normally we'd been down that route before, and we'd moved to the right-hand side and climbed down that way. And I remember moving over there, scrambling down, making sure that I had the first aid kit with me, and all I remember of going down there was, I think I probably put myself at risk going down there, which is probably not a very bright idea if you're the only adult on an expedition like that. And I remember at one stage I was in a big hurry to get down there, and I remember at one stage I was sort of hanging, and I would just happen to have my hand on a root that was all that was going. All that was stopping me from sliding all the way down. And I remembered I was halfway down at that time, so I just let go of that route, and somehow I landed okay. That was a stupid thing to do, but I wasn't thinking clearly. Then I looked. I was down on the area that he was in, and I was looking around to see where he was. And I could see where he was then, sort of just out of the water with this blood everywhere. I didn't know if he was alive or dead at that time. I don't suppose you dare think that he's dead. And so I made my way over. It was a fairly dry time of the year, or dry season anyway, and if there'd just been more water around, maybe he wouldn't have got so close to the edge anyway. Or he might have just landed in a pool and not been such a mess. So I made my way over to where he was lying, and on the way he brought a steel helmet along with him, his dad's army helmet, I think, and this was lying half in and half out of the water as well. And I remember thinking how he'd been making a thing of this all through the hike of having this helmet, and he was wearing it with the straps undone the way people do. It's somehow more macho to wear the thing and not tie the straps up. And I think it occurred to me then, if only he'd actually worn this helmet which he'd had with him all this time during the hike. If only he'd worn it at the time, he probably would have been better off. And so I arrived at Fosse, and I could see that he was breathing, and Brian had followed me down, and he was very close to me. And I didn't know what to do.
So you're at the foot of the cliff then?
No, I'd actually moved. I was in the pool there, but I was in scouts and things like that, and I've done some first aid training and that sort of thing, but all very mild stuff. And when I was actually faced with a situation of this person has been very seriously injured, my mind just went blank, and I just looked down, and there was just nothing in my mind. It was a case of I was just taking the information, and I could just see this youngster and the blood and everything like that. And actually had to wait until Brian was there. Brian came along, and I was 21, he was 14, he took over. And it was probably only for a couple of seconds or so. At least I hope it was only that time. They might not have noticed, Brian might not have noticed that I didn't know what to do. But I just didn't know what to do. I was in charge of these lads, I was the adult. I had the first aid kit, a big image of cuts and bruises and things like that. I'll patch you up, and then I'm faced with this person who's really seriously... Yeah, I knew he wasn't dead then, but I knew he was serious. I knew I was way out of my depth with his injuries.
So whose idea was it to send for some help?
No, that was mine. By that time, I was back in charge of myself. Brian, I saw the risk. Looking back now, I'm not sure that there was any danger of him sliding under the water. The water level wasn't going to go down. So I don't know why I had this idea that I didn't want him drowning on me. But I think I moved to his head, and I think I tried to comfort him or whatever. I think at this time he started to moan and he started to scream, and I think I moved up to... supposedly I was examining his head wound, but that didn't take very long because it was smacked right open to his skull. I could actually see his skull, and fortunately his hair wasn't very thick, But through this, I could actually see it seemed to be a couple of millimeters of skin that would, almost like in geography where you learn about these continents floating around on this hard core. There were these areas of, it was just a fairly jagged cut, but there were these moving sets of thick skin with this gap in between from which the blood just gushed out. So there was a definite deep cut, and the blood was just welling out of this. And I remember having the thought of he might have broken his back. So I didn't want to move him. I think I hauled him up out of the further out of the water, because he'd been up to his chest in it. It just lightly. I mean, his legs were. There could have only been about a foot of water or so, and other rocks as well. And somehow I got myself beside him, or I had his head somehow round about my chest, and so I was getting this blood all over myself as well. Not that that was a problem for me. And I ripped open the first aid kit and put I got bandages out, and I put disinfectant on them, and was trying to quench just to stop the bleeding. I think what happened was, although I told the rest of them to stay up there, Robin had come down as well, and I was very aware that the fact that he was still alive then didn't mean that he was still going to be alive for forever. He might die. He's still alive then. He was screamingly alive then, but he might not be alive for very much longer. And he wasn't bleeding that I thought he would bleed to death, but I didn't know very much, but the thought was very much in my mind that he might die. And I felt that if he did die, I must stay with him. Well, I must stay with him anyway, and I must just trust the youngsters to go and get help. So I gave Robbie my car keys, knowing that he knew how to drive. And although he was younger than Brian didn't know how to drive, but I sent the two of them to go back to the farmhouse and get help. I wonder why I'd given them the car keys to get help. I had. I don't know why I did that. But so they charged off, and I thought, right, they're going to get help from the farm. And I sent the two of them. I'm not sure why I sent the two of them. Maybe to keep each other company, but I can't remember why. I know I sent the two of them. I can't remember why I sent both of them. And then, so I thought it's just a matter of time. This lad is injured. He's not a first aid case. He's somebody that is going to need a lot of help. We're talking hospital, and we're talking hospital for a long time here. And I had to stay with him. I was holding him out of the water, and I was trying to comfort him, although he wasn't aware of what I was. He would be lying there moaning for a while. He'd go quiet for a while, and I would be watching him to see that he was still breathing. And then he would start to moan again, then he'd start to scream again, and he'd sort of move around a bit, but not very much, and his leg was broken as well, and his collarbone. And he would then go quiet. So you'd have these sort of repeating cycles, and I was there. And I think at that time I also became aware of the two littler boys. Fuffy was 14, Brian was 14, and Robin was 13, and they were out of action. So I had Bradley, who was about 12, and Ian, who was 10 or 11. And I think they both made their way down at this stage. I told Bradley to stay where he was, and they both were coming down, and I didn't want them to see what a mess Horsey was in, so I was shouting at them to stay where they were, and I think they were both crying at this stage. They weren't together, they were both coming down, but they weren't sort of coming down with each other. And Ian was definitely crying, and I thought at that time I didn't want him to see it because it was really unpleasant. And little Ian had been quite squeamish about things before. When I'd taken him along to the drive-in with us as a gang once, he got scared by one of the movies and wanted to be taken home and that sort of thing. And so I really didn't want him to get close. So I wanted him. We were in a shady grotto sort of area, so I told him what I wanted Ian to do was to go up and sit in the sun and wait for us. And I thought he'll still be able to hear Fossey screaming when he is, but at least he'll be in the sun, and it sounds warm in the sun. I mean, we weren't cold or anything like that. I don't know if I was cold, but just let him be in the sun, let him be away from the gloomy area, I suppose, that we were in. And I think I told Bradley to go back up to the top and fetch some kit that I'd left there, or some kit that we had left there. I think it might have been my camera or something like that, to give him something useful to do and to just make sure that it didn't get washed away in the water. I can't remember what task I'd given him, but it was some task that he was to go up there. And so Ian went out into the sun, and Bradley had to go back up the river. I wanted him to go back. And I was waiting there. Ian, I knew, would be okay. Okay, he was going to be unhappy and upset, and he could probably cry and that sort of thing. But I thought the best thing is for him to be out of sight. He was alone, but I didn't think Bradley would get himself worked up, and I thought if I'd sent Bradley with him, then Bradley would have just egged him on to get worse and worse, more upset. And I think at that time, when I'd got them out of sight, I suppose, I think I thought of this youngster that had this head injury, just what I didn't know very much about. Shortly after that, I started doing a neuropsychology course, so I started to have some idea of head injuries, but I was very aware of brain damage and people becoming vegetables and that sort of thing afterwards. And I actually found myself thinking, here I've got this 14-year-old rugby player, he's full of the jaws of life. Look at him last night in front of the movie being so full of life. What's going to become of him? Is he, okay, his leg's going to get better and all that sort of thing. This is if he doesn't die. And actually I found myself thinking, should I was on my own with him. I knew he was badly injured, and I actually thought, should I finish him off? Should I actually, I suppose you could say, put him out of his misery? What would be worse? What would, for him when he was fit and sporty and all that, would it be better to just let it be that he died in an accident, you know, that he'd been full of this full of life, enjoying himself, and he'd actually had this fall and he had died. I actually found myself, I don't think I would have done it, but I actually was looking around to see whether there was a rock nearby that I could maybe finish him off with, I suppose. It was very real at the time. It sounds, you know, now after the event, you think, oh, of course. But at that time, he was, especially when he was screaming. You know, I would have loved to have got him to shut up. It wasn't that I would have killed him just to shut him up, but it just, there was so. It wasn't a scream as in a horror movie. It wasn't even a human scream. It was a it wasn't a human scream. It was just this absolute pain, or he wasn't a human being then. I suppose I don't know whether I thought he might already be so severely brain damaged that there were times when especially when he went quiet, when he was screaming, it shook me, but when he went quiet, I don't know whether I had my fingers just in front of his nose to check that he was breathing all right. I was taking his pulse and that sort of thing to make sure that he was still alive. And I was like that for a long time, and I kept waiting. I knew help was on its way. Robbie and Brian would come back and they'd have people with them, and I'd given them instructions to phone for an ambulance as well. And then I heard them coming back, and I thought, this is, my heart started to lift. But when they actually came down, they said they were on their own, and they said there was nobody at the farmhouse, and the house was locked up and that sort of thing, so they couldn't phone. And I was really angry that they hadn't had the initiative between them to, in view of what had happened, to actually break a window or something like that and get at the phone, because the phone was there. So what had happened, they had then come back to me to tell me there's nobody there. So I was really angry at the time that they hadn't had that initiative. I think more so, Robbie was not one for very much initiative anyway. It was sort of like he'd had to have a bit of coaxing to do his planning bit for these sorts of weekends. But Brian, who, when I had not known what to do, Brian had known what to do then. But when Brian had gone, he hadn't. Between the two of them, they hadn't had the initiative to actually break a window to get into the house or do something like that. They'd just come back to me. So we'd lost all that time. There must have been a way for. It would have been 4 miles back. They'd done an 8-mile journey to come back and say, there's nobody there. So I probably shouted and swore at them. And I told them they'd had the car keys with them. They hadn't had the initiative to then drive somewhere either. So I sent them back and told Robbie, you know how to drive. You know, every other opportunity you've had to drive the car, you've wanted to drive the car, haven't you? So they set off again, and I was really, it just carried on. I think I've gone through the way I was feeling then, but it was just a continuation of that. I think it got worse because I knew it was going to be at least that amount of time again. And Bradley, I can't remember it very clearly, but Bradley smashed up some things. I can't remember. I think he broke a knife or something like that. I think he had a little temper tantrum or something. Okay, fair enough. The kid was what, 12 or so, and one of the. I can't imagine what I must have been like at that stage, but there was this boy who might die, and I was snappy, and I'd normally been tolerant and come on, Brad, looking after him and that sort of thing, and I was very, very edgy at that time, and I think that didn't help, so I probably shouted at him again, which made things worse. At last, timing sequence sounds a bit strange. At last, the boys returned. No, I can't remember whether they came, but a couple of farm workers came along with a couple of poles and a large sheet of corrugated iron, and they came down, and we got him onto. There was nobody with any medical knowledge. They were just muscle power to help get him out of there, and so we got him onto a stretcher, and we were told, somehow I got the message that we were not to go back to the main farmhouse, but there would be an ambulance waiting for us at a hotel called the Burn Valley Hotel, which was further down. I knew how to get there, or the people that were, the farm workers knew how to get there. So, and Robbie was quite chuffed at having gone for help. And Brian made some comment about his driving was terrible and he'd nearly taken the car off the road or something like that, but it was all right, the car was okay, and they were okay, and they'd got help, and they had phoned for an ambulance, so that, I felt bad that I'd been unpleasant to them when they, the first time. So there were, I think there were 3 farm labourers that had come to help. So to get the stretcher out, I was needed as well. So I sent all the boys back to the car, which is parked at the farmhouse, they were going to pick up little Ian, and they were going to take Bradley as well, and they were all going to go back to the car and wait for me there. And then the 4 of us took the stretcher. We were in mountainous terrain, and it was difficult to get him out of there. It was we were carrying him, it wasn't ideal stretch-wise. He was quite heavy. Yeah, he was taller than me, muscular. He was a heavy youngster, and we were going over uneven ground. If it had been a straight road or something like that, wouldn't have been nearly the hassle. But I kept stumbling as well, and I was feeling very tired at this stage, and I found it very. I was a student at that time. I used to go jogging and things like that, but I wasn't used to this sort of exercise, and I found I kept having to change hands, and all these farm labourers were, they hardly said anything, but they were a lot stronger than I was, and a lot more used to that sort of work. So I was the weakling amongst these people. He was my friend, and but I was the weakling of the 4, and they were sort of very tolerant. They didn't say anything when I kept sort of stopping and changing hands and that sort of thing. And Forsey carried on with the cycle of screaming a bit, and of course when we were moving around, or when I stumbled or something like that, he would be hurt more, or he would be become very uncomfortable. Yes, he would get possibly more hurt that way. And eventually my arms became really sore, and they were sore for quite a while afterwards. And eventually we got him down to the Oaks Hotel, and the ambulance had arrived at that stage, and there were a couple of paramedics there, and they knew what to do. That was great. That was great. So they put him in the. I gave details of who he was, and they took him into the hospital. They took him into the ambulance, and they shut the doors, and they set off. And that was good. And I was still covered with blood. I think somebody gave me a lift back to the farmhouse where I picked up the boys, and we drove back. We had a problem that with the amount of, somehow we were low on petrol. At that stage there was petrol rationing because there was petrol rationing for some reason. And there was a lot of difficulty in getting extra petrol, so I wasn't sure that I would be able to drive them all back to back home. And at that stage I phoned my parents, phoned my mom, and I would always do the precautions of making sure they knew the telephone numbers or something like that. And I said there has been a problem, and would they just phone the parents and let them know what had happened. Then I phoned Fossey's parents and told them what had happened and which hospital he was going to, and got that. I don't think we got any more petrol, but I'd made some arrangements. I can't remember all the details now, but I drove home. I think we got more petrol in, and I took the lads home and explained to the parents what had happened. And although I'd been tired, I think I was getting into a sort of dreamlike state at that stage. I became very active again, and as I took the youngsters home, I remember going into Brian's house and being invited in by his parents and offered coffee, and I was sitting there in their lounge suite with my still covered with blood. And I think very early on we'd gone back to Robbie's house and we picked up Philippa, my girlfriend, and she was being quite supportive. I think it was useful for me to have another adult there. And the youngsters didn't actually want to just go home, they wanted to go to the hospital and meet with Forsey. So we went back to the hospital, and I don't think we could see him, but I went and explained to the medical staff what had happened, and tried to well, there wasn't really much to say, but it was important for us to go there.
So what happened the rest of the evening? Can you remember what happened?
It gets a bit vague. I remember trying to take all the kids. I knew I had to go back to the hospital, and I had to see his parents. I remember I tried to take the lads home, but they were very clear that they wanted to go back to the hospital. And I don't know if I was too tired. I took Ian home and explained to his parents what had happened, because he wasn't regularly part of the team. And I took Bradley home as well and explained to his parents. And I think it was then Robbie, Phil, Brian and we went back to the hospital, and we met with the parents there, which was something I was worried about, because they could say, "What have you done to our son?" And I think, I'm not sure when I found out about it, but I'd wondered, how did it happen that he actually fell over this waterfall? And I think somewhere in that evening, the story had come out that he'd actually been having a wee over the waterfall as a big joke. Ha ha, look at me, I'm a big man having a wee over this waterfall. And it was while he was doing this that he'd actually slipped. And I think I felt very angry that something like this happened with him showing off or doing something stupid like that. I suppose you can be wise afterwards, but that you know, if he, such a stupid thing to be, okay, people do that all the time as a sort of joke, but if he'd been just doing something ordinary like walking along and had slipped, that had been somehow better than somehow him deliberately doing something dangerous in a position like that. I think I took the information somewhere along. It was only afterwards when I thought about it, I thought, how bloody stupid. You know, look what's happened as a result of that. And you can't say that when this person is injured. His parents, his father is a very oldish chap. I think it's on his second marriage or something like that, and very unsophisticated sort of person, shall we say. But his parents took it well. They were concerned about their son, but they didn't blame me. And I suppose I was expecting to get blamed. And at some stage, the father had said, if it had been in a car smash, if I'd had a car smash with it, he would have broken my neck. Yeah, great, thanks a lot. But if what had happened obviously wasn't my fault, and so he wasn't worried about that. And I think it was a couple of days afterwards, I went back to the hospital. I went every visiting hour to the hospital. I didn't take the kids. He was in intensive care for about 2 weeks, I think, and there was some doubt as to whether he was going to live or not, or he was on a critical list for about 2 weeks. And I went back to varsity after, Sunday, I can't remember whether I got that work done on Sunday, but there were 2 weeks when I was just carrying on, going back to varsity, ordinary varsity type work, knowing that am I going to get news that he's died or not? And I think it was after about 2 weeks his condition was stable and he stabilized and he was moved out of intensive care. And as soon as he was visitable, I went along to visit him every night for a good 2 or 3 weeks, which I suppose it was out of a sense of duty, really, because sometimes he wasn't fully conscious all the time, or he almost reverted back to being a baby, and he would sort of he wasn't the youngster that he had been. He would sort of look much more like a baby, really. And at that time we didn't know whether he would be brain damaged or not. Then he was taken down to a specialist hospital because there was internal hemorrhaging in his brain. And his mother was very good. His father was one of these sort of factual, old-fashioned types of people, but his mother seemed to be quite concerned about the effects it was having on me. And they took him down to Wentworth Hospital, which is has a special neuro section. Apparently they drilled a hole in his skull to release the internal hemorrhaging, and the pressure was such that when they drilled through, the blood squirted out and caked all over the ceiling. It was under that much pressure, so his mother said. And I found it. I had to go and visit him, but I found it very, very boring because I wasn't sure how much he was taking in, and there was certainly a sense of relief when visiting hours were over and I had to go. I couldn't stay away. I wouldn't have allowed myself to have stayed away, but I really found myself getting very bored while I was visiting. Could we stop for a while?
Could you tell me about when you went home and about your parents' reaction to all this?
I think my parents I'd contacted them fairly early on, so they knew that something was on, you know, or that they knew that there had been this accident, and we don't tend to communicate much as a family. I can't remember whether we put petrol in the car when we got back to their house, but they knew I was taking charge of the situation. What did they? Well, I was still in charge of the situation. They knew. They must have known that when I was back in the town that we were living in, and I think. I don't remember them actually saying anything. They didn't say, "Sit down and talk to us, son," or anything like that, but I wouldn't have known what to do if they had. I think they respected the distance that I was keeping. Something that seems a bit bizarre now, but when the evening was over, when I undressed, I took my shirt off, which had this blood from his head all over it, and I didn't. The rest of my clothes I put in the wash, but the shirt I hung it up on a, what do you call it? Coat hanger, and just on my cupboard, and I was just going to keep it there, and eventually my mother. After a day or two, my mother said, "This is unhygienic. I'm sorry, Barry. This is unhygienic." And I've since come across that as being sort of pathological grief, really. But I think there was a bit of strange behaviour, and I think my mom did draw the limit, saying, "No, hang on, that's it's going to rot in the shirt, and it's going to wipe out the shirt for any." It's not a good idea. Then 2 weeks later, they were quite tolerant about me because I had to borrow their cars, or a car, to go and visit him in hospital when that happened. They were quite tolerant about that. 2 weeks later, when he moved out of being in intensive care, I was watching a TV program, and it was not something very related. It was about some mother dying of something terminal, and the arrangements she was having to make for her kids or something like that. And I think I just started crying there, and I just carried on crying for, it must have been about an hour or something like that, and dinner happened at that time, and I just sat at the dinner table and I just carried on crying, and somehow it didn't seem to, they just accepted that. They didn't try and talk me out of it or anything, but it must have been an incredibly bad dinner, having one of the people just sitting there crying into his food. But that was about it. That was it. I remember also seeing something on the TV about some macho, serious mountain climbers had fallen or something like that shortly afterwards, and then the Air Force had gone in with helicopters and raised people out and that sort of thing. I remember thinking we could have done with something like that. You know, my arms were pretty messed the next day as well, because I think I had overstrained them there, and I just didn't seem to have any power in my arms anymore. And it was just, I think, a jealousy there really of seeing if you're one of these big mountain climbers and things like that, you have an accident and all these resources come to your availability. Whereas if you're just taking a bunch of kiddies hiking, then it's just great a little bit.
What about your ex-girlfriend, Philippa? How did she react?
I suppose the whole relationship really was geared with her little brother and her big macho boyfriend go out and do these manly deeds during the day, and then we come back and she has cooked for us, and we then sit and almost me having my family duties out of the way. We then have a sort of man and wife evening type idea, although we didn't get married or anything. I think she was supportive, but in an unobstructive sort of way. I think she was used to the idea of me being in charge of things, and I think she was sort of more open to my feelings, asking some of the sorts of questions that you're asking now. Or I think she was saying things like, "This must be horrible," or something like that, which I didn't think about. I thought, my job is to do this. This is what I've got to do. This is what I've got to do, and that sort of thing. Not the, maybe I am feeling upset about it, but now is not the time to be upset about it. I've got to assure the kids that things are okay, and I've got to let the parents. I've got to be calm and make, not let anybody panic. I've got to keep the situation under control. If I can remain calm and be confident, it's all right. Everything is going to be okay. Not tell them how to raise their kids, but when taking the kids back, say that there has been something unpleasant, this has happened, and I'll keep you informed of that. So, we did. Sorry, after you.
She's your ex-girlfriend. I was just wondering whether.
No, I think our relationship was fine at the time, but it split up for other reasons afterwards. I think there were elements of this. I think it's very long and complicated. I didn't break up immediately afterwards, and I valued her support at the time.
Did you go on any outings with the children after that?
Yeah, something that seemed to be a good idea. Well, I very much wanted to not be put off. I'm somebody who's been in scouts and things like that since I was, I wasn't a cub, but I was in scouts from around about the age that one could start with that sort of thing. And I didn't want to stop. Okay, this kid's come on an outing with me. It's not scouts or anything like that. It's just a group of friends, and I didn't want to let it win, or I didn't want to stop going at that time. So 2 weeks later, we had another outing again. We went back to the same farm, but a different area of the farm, and I was shaken by what had happened. The idea is, if a horse throws you, then the best thing to do is for you to get straight back on the horse, and that sort of thing. But I've got photos of that outing, and it's pretty ridiculous because we didn't go. I would have been interested in going back to have a look at that place again, because I'm not sure of the distance. I've said things like anything from you fell 25 meters to, I've given all sorts of, because I've no idea how far it was. It was enough of a fall for him to fracture his skull. A compound fracture. Can you have a compound fracture of your skull? It wasn't a lightweight fall, and he did probably hit head first. I'm not sure how he hit. I would have liked to have gone back and had a look at it, but I haven't gone back there. Took most of the same gang back, and I've got photos of them. I had a motorcycle helmet, and one of the new boys that came along for that first time is wearing this crash helmet. We're not doing anything dangerous at all, but he's got this crash helmet firmly strapped to his head. Ridiculous. I don't think I was taking it. I think I was shaken by that, and didn't want to take any chances. And we didn't go. We went on that one last outing, and it was I contacted Fossey's mom, and I said, I want to go again, but it seems a bit insensitive. While one of the people that came last time is still in hospital and we're going out again. But she said no, go ahead, and he would have wanted it that way. So we went out again, and we had a while later, when Fossey was first on a weekend out of hospital, we had an outing of the whole lot together, and we had a barbecue at my house, and that was a nice outing, but basically that group pretty much stopped after that.
What were the long-term effects of all this? How's Fossey now?
I haven't kept in touch with him, which is rather, I think when he got better, I thought, thank God for that, let me get out of here fast. I've bumped into him once or twice occasionally, and I'm a bit embarrassed about that, because I think I should have taken more of an interest in when I've felt that I had his life in my hands, almost. That I think when I found out that he was going to be okay, and when I'd done my duty and that sort of thing, when he was better, I wanted to keep my distance. And I think that's the same for, I didn't take any of those kids out again on any outings. Well, I haven't been on any outings since then. But the time scale is a bit out now for this talk, but I bumped into him at a school function or something like that. I was visiting, or there was some reason that I bumped into him socially, and he seemed to have made a full recovery. He seems to be coping okay with school now. Well, I think he went on to complete school successfully. So it makes me glad that I didn't actually batter his brains out myself. But he did make a complete recovery, and I've kept my distance from him.
So you're saying you've never been on any outings since with the children. Is your life fairly solitary now, would you say?
Yeah, I think, I suppose it's tempting to say, in spite of this getting back onto the horse that threw you type idea, I did that and I showed everybody that I was capable of going again, but it just doesn't, it's something that I've enjoyed in the past, going on these sorts of outings, but just, I think also, if Fossey had died, there's a sense of relief. Obviously, there's a sense of relief that he didn't die and that he's got better, and he seems to be going to live a very ordinary life now. But if he had died, I would have had. I was 21 when it happened. How do you live with the idea of? I suppose you look at other people, and other people's idea of a good weekend is to go out to party on Friday night, drink far too much, have a hangover all of Saturday, then go and do exactly the same thing Saturday night, and that sort of thing. And there's not nearly that sort of risk involved. And I hadn't thought there was that sort of risk, because I was 21 at that time. I'd been leading camps since I was 14, and I'd always been concerned with safety and things like that, but we'd never had anything like this happen to me before. I worried about things. I'd worried a lot about things like that happening, but it was where it was. I was at the back. The person I thought was at most risk of hurting himself, like possibly breaking an arm or a leg or something like that, was Bradley. And it turns out that probably the strongest person there, or the least likely person, does something stupid. Okay, a little joke. I mean, it was, well, not really funny, but it might have been funny with the youngsters that he was with. He could have killed himself. So I think, do I need a complication like that in my life? Why don't I just, if I can, I don't know, I might get around to going hiking or something like that again. Also, I don't have the contacts anymore it just seems to be a lot less complicated, my life at the moment, without that sort of thing. I'm not unhappy. It's a good evening it's an enjoyable way to spend an evening, and I'll do something again at some stage.
What about your relationship with Fossey's parents? Was there any sort of repercussions there?
No, well, I got on very well with his mom all the time. Something that really annoyed me about his father was once his father had said something about Fossey had come along on a couple of outings like this beforehand, and when we seemed to get fairly close at the time, and we had this very injured lad that we were all interested in his recovery. And at some stage his father had, as an intended compliment, said to me something about when I'd first invited his son out, he thought I might be queer or something like that. I mean, in the context of, I'm taking my girlfriend's younger brother out for an outing, and Fossey's one of his friends, could he come along? But that consequently, with his inquiries, he's found out that I'm quite okay, and he sort of shared that with me as a we're all friends now sort of thing. And I was never been impressed with him, with his intelligence, and I suppose I was sort of amused. Well, it's not really a compliment, but I was quite amused at his inquiries. I mean, what sort of inquiries would that be? I think during one of these evenings, okay, it wasn't an appropriate thing, but I got so bored during this time when I was being with Fossey because during visiting hours, because it was on my outing that he got this injury, that I mentioned it to him that his dad had actually said to me that he had thought I might be queer, but I'm all right as far as his father's concerned. And I hadn't thought anything more about it. It was just one of these things. It seemed, okay, I probably wouldn't have done it again now. But apparently this is when Fossey was getting better, and apparently Fossey had worried about this, that my feelings had been hurt or something like this. And I got a call from his father saying, come and see us now, or I will come and see you, or something like that. So I went round to his house. Didn't want him in my house, his father. So I went round there, and he tore a strip off me of how dare I say something like that to his son, when his son was with me being a psychology student. Didn't I realise how upsetting it would be for this lad who he said had a very high regard of me, had got the feeling that I might have been hurt by this, and I think I was annoyed by the whole thing. I was contemptuous of the father, I suppose, but just something one could have done with that, I think.
So, looking back at it now, is there any way that you would have liked to change it or reacted differently? Would you have coped any differently?
I think the most embarrassing side of it was my lack of medical knowledge. I think there's no way I could have prevented. Up till the fall, I was doing the right thing. I was staying at the back with Bradley, who was at risk. Okay, I could have not taken Bradley along, but yeah, I might not have taken him along, but I wouldn't have known that. I was where I should have been, bearing in mind who I had along there. I think what I'm most embarrassed about is my lack of medical knowledge, that when I went down there, I was the leader, I was in charge, I was the one with the first aid kit, and I didn't know what to do about that. So I think if I do anything like that again, I'm going to brush up on my knowledge of first aid. And I owe Brian a lot. I've got a lot of respect for Brian, although I haven't had any contact with him either. But you know, that he knew what to do, and I didn't. And I don't know whether he knew that I didn't know what to do, or whether I just looked as though I was doing something. But I think I'd have brushed up on that. I can't think of anything else really. I mean, I couldn't have predicted that when the boys found the farmhouse locked, they would have come back. I wouldn't have. You can't say. It didn't occur to me at that time that there might not be anybody there, or that they wouldn't have the initiative to do something, or even drive the car and go and look for help at that stage. But they came back. No, I think it's just that lack of knowledge. I think everything else. I would. If I ever get involved in anything like that again, I'll be more knowledgeable. Although, no matter how knowledgeable I was, I think I would have. He wasn't a first aid case. He was definitely a hospital case.
Okay. Right.
Do you have any more questions?
No. How do you feel now, then? To debrief you.
Right. End of role play. I'm not 21. I'm not 21. This is real. This happened when I was 21, and it's 8 years ago now. And when I was thinking about doing a role play like this, I thought, well, that's something that hasn't influenced my life at all. And it'll be a nice role play that I can demonstrate the procedure, or the stages in which one can do a debriefing, and the sorts of things that are likely to emerge. In the first story, the gloss over the things like I didn't know what to do with him, and the anger that one felt, and some of the other things there. I thought there were a number of useful sort of points, and I really didn't expect to find as much emotion as what I did. And I am feeling, I can't just smile and say, well, how do I do that sort of thing. I think I did really want to stop when we stopped there. I really wanted to stop and just have a breather. Yeah. I have, shortly afterwards, I wrote an account of this down, as I had done of some of the other outings that we'd been on, of just the amusing anecdotes and things like that. And I think a lot of this material is written down, and I've sort of lent it to friends and things like that, also sent it out as a circular almost. I suppose I also haven't really talked to somebody about it in that sort of depth, because I wasn't sort of acting, or I wasn't trying to over-dramatize it, or trying to deliberately dramatize it.
Did you find it difficult to talk about it?
I'm just aware of how much in stops and starts I've been talking when it's something that should be fairly familiar to me. As you've commented, one loses the idea of it actually being a role play, or the.
It becomes like yesterday. And do you feel differently about it now that you've actually spoken it out? Or?
I think what I'm surprised at is now, 8 years on, it was about a year after that, when that actually happened. That was in '82. For a while after that, I was just involved. I just used to go along to cub camps and things like that. I was involved as cubs, which doesn't involve anything with very much risk. And then after that, about 15 months after that happened, I actually got re-involved with Scouts again, and did some things which could have been a lot more dangerous than that. Something that's ironic is it's the second time that something like that's happened to me. When I was in Australia in '79, I was involved in I was a leader with the Church of England Boys Society, which I think they might have in Britain. And I wasn't in charge of that outing though, and it was a leader, and we were heading inland from Sydney to somewhere in the Australian interior, and 2 or 3 carloads of kids all going out camping for a week or so. And we stopped for a comfort break, and one of the leaders, I think he was the leader in overall charge of this, walked into a mini forest to go and relieve himself, and found a road, what looked like a road in the darkness. So he walked out into this road to get to the other side, obviously, and fell down an unspecified amount of distance. It was a railway cutting. And I was one of those that went down. We had paramedics and that sort of thing, and there was somebody else, a youngster with me, who again seemed to know more about first aid than I did. So, but that we weren't nearly as remote. I wasn't as far away, and there were a lot more people with the proper knowledge at that time. So that I found rather ironic. Right. Yeah, I'll calm down.
Right.
Thanks a lot, Tom.
Coffee in order.
Coffee.